All right. Well, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Seattle Data Guy Live. I feel like it's been a little bit since I've done one with someone else. So, Shinji, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully, your day is going great this Monday. Yeah. Anyway, so for anyone who doesn't know, Shinji, you've kind of had a pretty good career, I think, in both the data world as well as now you're second time founder, correct?
Yep.
You sound very.
Can you hear me
thrilled.
okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
Okay. Checking your audio.
Yeah, I was actually just trying to check out the comments.
Oh,
sorry.
Oh, you're all good. Yeah, but so you've been pretty much in the data space for the last, I think, over a decade, and originally started distributed computing. Now you're kind of doing data discoverability, and so I kind of want to talk through a lot of that. But before diving into that, I think data people in particular have a bad habit of only ever talking about the data stuff that they do. So I wanted to ask, when you're not dealing with data things, what do you do for fun?
Oh, I take walks, do some yoga, meet friends, eat some good food. There's nothing specific other than that. I used to ski, but I had an ACL injury in 2021, and I haven't gone back to slope yet. But those are some of the things that I want to get back to.
Okay. So you're an intense athlete if you have an ACL injury. It means you do too many
I wouldn't
things.
say intense. I wouldn't say intense. Intermediate, let's say.
Okay. Yeah. I feel like you have to be a certain skill level or like do enough sports to like tear your ACL. You can't just be starting out.
That's true. Yeah. Or if you are not like super careful all the time.
All right. So now talking and turning it back to data, like how did you get to working on the data side of things?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. Been really excited to be on your show, and obviously been following you, and it's been great to see you posting about many different trends and also very educational materials for entry level, mid level, and also just a lot of people in the data industry. The way and how I got into data is I studied computer science. I majored in software engineering at University of Waterloo in Canada. And Waterloo has this really great program called Co-op, where you get to like intern at a bunch of companies. And one of my very first internship was at Sun Microsystems Research Lab in their, I think at the time they were called Management Science team. And the management science team owned this sales forecasting model that gets distributed to all sales and operations every month. And that was like a huge R model that crunches about 10-year worth of sales data. And initially I was building the kind of like the visualization layer, like interactive, like dashboard, but in like, all the graphing libraries and JavaScript at the time, where it kind of led me to end up working on the actual model underneath with R. And I was testing out some parallel computing in R at the time. There's a package called Snow. Anyway, that's kind of how I got into data. That experience kind of got me into working with many different types of data, many different ways that we treat or transform data. Because shortly after that forecasting project, I also did another, like a correlation, data correlation project regarding kind of looking at Markov chain and like the network effect type of stuff. So that's kind of like my more data science type of work. That's how I got into it. And then there were other occasions, like at Facebook, I was working in their growth team, where a lot of the parts that I was working on was around optimizing our SEM campaigns. So that was a lot of writing ETLs and putting out like reports. to optimize different keywords and audience, so on and so forth, for user acquisition and advertiser acquisition. So yeah, that's how I got in.
I'm curious because you said ETL at Facebook. What was Facebook using at the time to build like ETLs?
So there was like a huge Hive like infrastructure that people were using for our purposes, because like most of the data was just coming from like Google Ads and whatnot. We actually built most of our model in the growth team in Python. There was a internal library called, I think internal, maybe it wasn't just internal, called DataB, and that was kind of like the primary one that I was using. Yeah, and then there were couple other things that I did too. So it was still like a software engineering, but it was like a lot of that integration with different APIs, and then also just crunching data and mapping the data with more richer, like user activities or conversion rates and things like that.
Okay, I was curious if it was different than my experience, because
right.
we had Data Swarm, so I don't know if that was like an initial version or a secondary version of DataB, or so
I think it's pre-Data Swarm days, actually.
Yeah. I think the other thing I thought was interesting was like, so you worked at Sun Microsystems, which I don't think at the time Facebook had bought that office, but I think later on Facebook bought the office.
It's the same office
of Sun Microsystems. So it was like this interesting kind of connection. I was like, oh, you kind of worked at the same office. I don't think we probably worked at the same office at that time, but it would have been funny had you worked at both iterations.
Right. Yeah. I was, I think, 1601 California, which is like a back campus of Stanford when I was working at Facebook. But then when I visited in the Menlo Park office later, visiting my friends there, it's just so crazy to see how the campus like changed so differently from when it used to be Sun versus Facebook, and then also like trying to figure out where my office used to be, because I used to have my own office as an intern at Sun, which now I think is part of a cafeteria, but like the building numbers are still the same.
Oh, okay.
16, so
it's funny. It's funny. Yeah. So I thought that was an interesting kind of connection.
Good old days.
Good old days. So I noticed you kind of, again, you kind of listed this out, but you've played a few different roles, including software engineer, analyst, data scientist, and also product manager. And I think product manager is kind of this interesting role. So what kind of led you into kind of going down the product management route?
Yeah. So I think a lot of, just like when I look back at my career, it's more like my focus and the interest that I had around work has kind of shifted from first, like, I want to build things. How can I build this? And how can I build this in the best way possible? Which is more of an engineering mindset, to more like, deciding what are we building, and what, are we building this first or this later, and what's more important, which I think is more product, but then it's also very much correlated to why. Like when you're starting to think about what, you have to think about like why, like what's the priority, like who is this important to, who's the audience, and so on and so forth. And then why is more around like the business needs, or like what we're trying to achieve, so on and so forth. So for me, I went through that type of transition, and when I decided that product manager might be the right role for me at the time. So I guess like if I were to track back, after Facebook, I worked at a management consulting firm because I wanted to learn more about how companies actually make decisions, and that's more about like why did we make this decision to build this product or invest in these areas of the business, so on and so forth. I wanted to build something, and that was like a game app. And the company that I ended up joining was a mobile ad network. And going from like, nothing to building an app, having like 50,000 active users was like a great experience for them to bring me as the first product manager of the company. So at the time, I would say I didn't necessarily know what I was running into, what is like required to be a product manager or whatnot. But I have had all the experiences of building an app, as well as promoting an app, as well as figuring out scoping out and like what to build, so on and so forth. So that's kind of how I got into product management. And I realized that now, obviously, like product managers, like PMs in different companies also work in very different ways, depending on the company culture and how the product is built and which industry they are in. But for me, like a lot of the core is really around scoping and defining that product. But in order for you to be a really good product manager, you also need to have a really good understanding of both sides of like, why is this important? Who are we building it for? As well as how is it going to be actually implemented, so that you can balance those into the product. That's kind of how I got into it and then feel about product management.
Yeah, it feels like that probably, I think, led into the next part of where I was going, which is Concord Systems, which I'd love to kind of like, if you want to give a quick background on what that was that you kind of built and kind of why you built it, I think it'd be interesting.
Sure. So Concourse Systems is a company that I spun out from Yieldmo, which is the mobile ad network that I initially joined as a product manager. So when I initially joined Yieldmo, they just raised their Series A. They were growing very quickly, had about 20 people. And as part of that growth, one of the parts that we noticed is scaling our data systems. Scaling our data systems in the side of data ingestion and processing and the front end. So this is primarily because as an ad network, they were consuming and processing all the traffic coming to very large publishers like CNN, Forbes, Reuters, Fox News, CBS News, and then we see all the traffic that goes up and down if there's like some crazy event that happens in the world or whatnot. And it got to a point of like volume of around 10 billion events a day. And it like that scale, and then the parts that we wanted to apply, like, machine learning that enables us to serve the next ad better so that you can click on it, or personalizing the messaging for you, things like that. Those things were really hard to maintain stably at the time. And the main engineer, or the lead engineer of the company at the time, was who was actually generally getting paged in the middle of the night. He was very frustrated, and he's a very systems type of person, was working on this side project and asked me if I could help him productize it. And this is kind of like led us two of us to leave Yieldmo together to start Concord Systems. Concourse Systems was just focused on distributed stream processing. So in today's term, like this is kind of like Apache Pulsar, Flink. It used to be more of a replacement for Apache Storm or Samza. So these are basically systems that sits between Apache Kafka or some kind of message queues, as well as data sinks, whether that's like, HDFS or any data warehouses that can take the heavy IO. That's kind of how I got into stream processing or distributed systems overall. Prior to that, I wasn't as deep on the data infrastructure side and the distributed systems, but I learned a lot in that industry. I would say stream processing overall is kind of like at the time, we were very early in the market. Yeah. Many companies that we talk to, either they already know that they have issues around it, so it's easier conversation, but that's pretty much like maybe less than 10% of the customers that we talk to. Majority of the people, they were more of like, well, like, why do I need streaming? Like, why can't I do this in batch? Or like, is this like really important? Or like, how real time does it have to be? So there were very specific industries and types of companies that we were working with. at the time. But overall, compared to now, where like Confluent has already IPO'd and like this area has like developed a lot. Yeah, but like we started at a very early times of streaming overall.
Yeah. I think the other interesting thing, like you and David from Estuary, probably did you guys bump into each other back then, or I don't even know if you know each other now, but I feel like you must know each other now. You don't know? Okay. I was thinking,
I heard of Estuary for sure.
Yeah, I was like, you and David both. Like, I was thinking that like you guys should both be on a panel together because both of you are have had a company, sold a company, are still in data, trying to work with data. Also, I think Estuary is his spinoff from when he worked at either LiveRamp or the previous company that he had that got bought by LiveRamp, and then he spun off as well. So I'm like, there seems to be some correlations there. So I'm like, interesting. So
there you go. So my CTO from Concord Systems, after he left Akamai, he decided to start another streaming company. Instead of stream processing, he decided to go after Kafka now. So that's what he's working on now, called the Red Panda.
Yeah. Oh yes. Okay, that makes sense. Yes, Red Panda. Yes. I'm trying. What was Red Panda before? Was it something with a V? No. Was it just Red Panda?
Vectorize.
Yes. I was like, I feel like I called it something, and then like 6 months later, it's like, and now we're Red Panda. And I was like, okay. So yes. Okay. Speaking of like pivots and making switches, right? Like you've kind of gone a different route as well, right? Like you've Concourse Systems, whatever. You've now kind of maybe seen a new area that you want to focus on, which I'd say is like data catalogs, data discoverability. So like what led you down that path to begin with?
Yeah, so for me, co-founding Concourse Systems and going through that whole like end-to-end journey of building an initial product, doing customer discovery, trying to find product market fit, and then later also selling the company to Akamai. And then what happened at Akamai with the IP that we sold and how that got applied to customers' infrastructure. Like the whole process like made me think about like more or less like, where if a startup or new company is coming into if you were to start a new company in the data space, like what are the aspects or opportunities or gaps that are going to be best fulfilled, was like one way that I was looking at it. The other part, and also the kind of like the major part that got me to start SelectStar was primarily because with Akamai, I started working with a lot of large companies, especially in automotive and consumer electronics industry. And it became very clear that a lot of this compute and infrastructure level work is something that they want to continue to offload to cloud providers. Whereas there are new emerging problems around data consumption and usage that they weren't able to get to. They want to get to, but then they're too busy trying to fix the technical issues, and then there weren't as many like great services that they can really rely on to do so from coming out of the cloud provider, if that makes sense. I felt like that was an opportunity overall. And then, one was like application side, just seeing kind of that types of gap. The other part is just how the market really has evolved in the data. And when I say market, I'm just talking about the, who are the end users, how many end users are there, and how are they actually using the data? Like when you think about that part, that has changed so much compared to like 5 years ago. Like we have now like, analytics engineers. We have so many people that have access to BI tools, even though whether they write SQL or not. So many departments have their own analysts creating reports and KPIs and making the business decisions so quickly. And all of those changes that's happening inside the organization, I felt like is really making this like aspect around data discovery painful. So this is why I decided that I wanted to tackle this problem around data discovery with SelectStar.
Yeah, that the whole like making their own like their own processes and stuff really resonates. I think I've had like 2 or 3 conversations just today where it's like, we're a marketing team. We have like our own analysts. They do their own things. They build their own things. We don't want to bug IT. And that's always been a thing, but I think it's even more, right? Like you said, like there's just tools now that make it so much easier. Even beyond just Excel. In terms of data catalogs, like, I've been kind of, or at least I did a light deep dive into like, how many people are using them in a recent survey. And it's like somewhere in the range of probably 30% of people have them. And then, 70% of people don't. So do you feel like there's any misconceptions with data catalogs that kind of keep that from getting used, essentially, from people like looking into trying to use data catalogs?
Yeah, I think data catalog, the term in general, have a not that great of a reputation in the industry. Like traditionally, data catalogs also have been around for a long time, right? And since the database has been around almost. Yes. But setting it up and then having it to be actually useful has been always a big challenge. And I think that's why it just has a bad rep, where also because it's not just a tool that you install and then it will just run as you schedule it. You do need to also bother people to add documentation. You need to like configure them. There are all these aspects where I would say data teams and engineering teams generally don't necessarily like want to always do. And then even when they did, they didn't necessarily get the best ROI out of the effort that they put in. So I think that's one of the reasons why. Because I think people that haven't necessarily seen modern catalogs recently, they would think about, so how am I gonna have to prepare the metadata to ingest into the catalog, and what do I have to set up for that? But like that's also not the only issue, right? Are we going to make it so that it's actually useful for everyone? So I think that might be why. Also, for specifically smaller companies, if you only have, 50 tables and like less than 100 dashboards, you just may not need their catalog, right? Everyone knows what things are. So that's, I think, the other reason why. But I think there is definitely a lot more companies that probably need a good catalog, because they do need to have a good single source of truth in order for them to continue to scale. But it almost feels like, I need to now build this knowledge base of like data documentation, and that just sounds very overwhelming.
Yeah, that's why like even a baseline like data catalog project probably feels like for some people it's like a 6 month to 12 month to 18 month like project, right? Like between having to install it, having to go through all the documentation, all the process, updating everything. Like you said, data catalogs to some degree are not necessarily a new concept, but I guess how do you think like data teams need to change their mindset about like modern data catalogs to kind of shift some of that? Is that still kind of the truth for everything?
I think most of the modern catalogs now really do help around collecting the metadata automatically. So this is like one part that most people don't have to worry about. I think the more of the parts that will be more helpful to think through is around what types of data do we want to actually have it documented and cataloged so that everyone can refer to it as a single source of truth. Because it's really the value that you get out of without necessarily having to point people to the specific tables and columns directly, and then being that not necessarily a barrier, but more of like a dependency for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And there are always this like, one of my customers called it like, hey, this person is our data den, and we just ask them, any questions that we have about data. But what are you gonna do when data den is not there anymore? Or can he take vacation, or you know what I mean? Also, that type of approach just accumulates a lot of tribal knowledge inside the company. So, and like earlier you mentioned that, different departments, like whether it's marketing or operations, they have their own analysts. And this tribal knowledge is also getting very segregated. So I say, this is how we calculate revenue, and they say this is how we should calculate revenue. And we only find out about this when we're actually looking at reports at like management meetings. So these are kind of like later down the line consequences that you want to avoid. So I think there's a lot of benefit to it. It's really just more of like, how can I get started? And I think this is a part that modern catalogs are trying to make it very easy to get it going.
Yeah. I think, I haven't been in the data world that long, but long enough, I don't know, almost going on 10 years here. And it's always surprising how much I think departments are still very segregated. Like, I always assume that like companies are starting to share a little more across, the whole, like, that's like part of the goal to some degree of a data warehouse is to integrate data across all these departments. And so I think that kind of resonates in terms of like trying to bring some sort of collaborative effort across all these departments that have similar terms or different terms, and maybe you have two different sort of finance teams that are calculating things differently. So go ahead.
Yeah, the big part, so regarding just like trying to make it easier to get started is like the first thing that we are trying to achieve at SelectStar. The other part that it just kind of reminded me of, since you mentioned that, is that like, because like for us, like we will analyze all your metadata and query logs, and usually it's like set up by someone in the data team that has like more admin access and then can give us that system level data.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you like it or not, we're gonna tell you how your team or you yourself or this other person was using the data. And then you kind of have to also like be open about like what the underlying assumptions are. And I think just kind of having that common ground that everyone can utilize is definitely one big step that a lot of companies can take.
Yeah. I think the other thing, like going more towards the bigger picture of data discoverability, data tooling in that space is, I wrote a kind of tongue-in-cheek, it wasn't really an article, just like a tongue-in-cheek quick newsletter where I was like, catalog of data catalogs. And I only, I think, put in 26, and I put out that article. And I think I had another dozen reach out and be like, we're not in that list. So like, how do you like when there's that many like options, like how do you feel like you guys are really trying to stick out overall?
Yeah, so the whole industry also has evolved a lot, especially the last couple of years. Because there are also a lot of companies that I have heard about that either pivoted from different something else or have started more recently. For us, it's really coming from like kind of our roots of trying to deliver fast time to value. And that's really coming from being able to set it up really quickly, being able to also do it yourself. Like we will kind of like make sure that a lot of the automation is built in, so you don't have to worry about the setup. And then from the day one of your trial, you can see all the results right away, whether that is around column level data lineage, popularity that will tell you which are the most important data versus which are the data that you might want to deprecate, who are the top users of each of the tables, and what are the downstream dashboards, connected dashboards look like. So all of that from day one, so that you can actually leverage that on your own. without having to wait for a sales engineer to set up a POC instance for you, or talking to like layers of salespeople, is really kind of like where we are trying to come down to. And we're starting to add more aspect where we are starting to leverage this kind of deep essential features around lineage or popularity. So this upcoming year, I'm very excited to start releasing some of those features out in the world, so that it's not about just the catalog. Catalog is definitely one of the major feature that SelectStar has, but because we are approaching this as a data discovery, we're going to try to find as much insight as we can automatically out of just your box. And that, I would say, will always be that we are trying to make and how we see SelectStar stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Again, it'll be an interesting year, I think, for everyone. Congratulations for your funding. I think that will make it at least a little bit of a smoother year, maybe smoother next
Thank
year,
you.
hopefully.
Glad it's done.
Now it's done. Now you can focus on work. You're
Yeah.
excited to focus on actually producing things. Speaking of next few years, where do you see this whole data world going in the next 5 years? 5 years, I think, is still the most reasonable, but still somewhat out there request.
I feel like 5 years too far away for me to test. Seriously, yeah. Just even like everything that has happened in the last 5 years is also pretty dramatic. And I mean, if anything, I think there will be some, consolidation in the market regarding not just between the companies in the same category, but also multiple categories being a little bit more converged together. And so that would be more like a kind of like a platform type of approach. But then once there are enough number of platforms, there will also be other smaller startups that looks at the specific issues between those platforms. So yeah, I mean it's hard for me to say other than I think if anything, like some of the near term, maybe in the next year or two, that I am starting to see is applying the generative AI in the different aspect of the product, which is also very exciting. I think there will also be more aspect around like more of like the human collaboration side that will become better than just manual configuration and setting up rules, things like that.
Yeah, no, I hope we get towards that place. Also, if anyone out there has questions, feel free to post them in YouTube or LinkedIn. But yeah, the other question I think I like generally asking is, are there any terms in the data world you kind of wish were either changed or removed?
Yeah, actually, yeah, just with the automation stuff, one of my other ideas other than SelectStar, which will, I mean, these are all some of the ideas that I also had as more of part of a longer term roadmap of Concord before. But I always wish that I had a like a service that will just write me the ETL job just by introspecting the data type. You know what I mean?
Like, does nothing really, I mean, I guess nothing really kind of does that right now. Like you do have to be pretty specific in terms of
That's
like your data. I'm trying to think. I mean, they'll always guess. They always kind of know what your data types are and kind of try to write it, but maybe they don't write the conversions that well. Is that what you're thinking? Like the actual conversion to your target?
I'm just talking about really rudimentary ETLs. Like you'll probably for any like, and maybe there needs to be a little bit more context of like whether this is going to what type of reports, but generally like you would want to get like sum and average or uniques and whatnot, like depending on the data type, and especially when the raw data comes in. Yeah, so I don't know, somebody should build it.
Yeah, if anyone out there has the time. and the resources and
Yeah.
it feels like marketing and not making actual money for a few years. It could become something. I do feel like the ELT space I think is interesting because to some degree, right? Like a lot of companies seem to try to be removing the necessity for it, not the T part, but like EL, right? Like it's like, hey, what if you could just
That's
have
true.
your data shared via Snowflake, or have, whatever, your data automatically transferred. I for one am really trying to hoping for a world where I no longer have to see an SFTP job ever again. Haven't had it yet, but someday it'd be nice.
Yeah, or just like how OLAP or like modern OLAP is evolving for as a, like an analytics database. With initially with just like a lot of the, I guess, indexing and the how you partition the data for both BigQuery and Snowflake, but now with like projects like DuckDB, and it's pretty interesting how that actually might be maybe a better option to be able to just run the compute however you need to. But still, somebody on the product side or business side or the data analytics engineer will have to define how they want to query that, right? So
that is an interesting kind of coming up space. I think that's come maybe the last 6 months, 8 months, where it's just like, oh, is this kind of like the foil to Snowflake and all these like very whatever managed service approaches. So we'll see what Mother Duck does, and DuckDB does, and that'll be interesting as well. They at least prove that people can get funding. Sorry,
yeah, for sure. It's an insane amount of funding that they got. Actually, just like makes me think about like some of the new other cool things that I've seen recently, which another part is more on this like real-time collaboration using more like a database or states on the edge. So either it can be managed on the client side or on the server side. But that's I think the other part, we'll probably see more of this like asynchronous, like eventual consistency of data being more normal.
Is there a specific solution you're referencing there, or?
There are a few, but very early stage to tell. There is a company called Drifting in Space, and they recently launched like one of this as like a, I believe, graph database, but it's a database on the edge. But they use on the client side. They leverage the client side. Yeah, so there's like nothing really stored in server. So I mean, it's a little off topic for the data folks here, but yeah.
I mean, I feel like, right, like it is and isn't, right? Like we are going towards this world that like wants more compliance, wants us like less data to be centralized in a central database somewhere that's like PII. So to some degree, it like makes sense. Like, yeah, how do we store this data on the edge in a way that's still fast to run whatever ML model Apple or whatever company it is wants to run on the edge. So.
In a way, the part that would be applicable to more big data people will be around privacy data, GDPR, and where they are being stored. Because even when I was working at Akamai, there was a lot of discussions around the provenance of data. Like where it was originated from and where it should be stored, and how much can be anonymized or aggregated before it can be sent back to the actual data warehouse or centralized data warehouse.
Yeah, we definitely had some of those discussions at Facebook, especially like we were just like going with like, even if we know just the month that someone started, like their gender, and there was like one more attributes, like we pretty much know who it is. So it's like, how far, like what information do we need to get rid of to like actually technically make it anonymous, but still useful in the future to do, analytics if that's something we want to do. And it gets tricky. It's weird how little you need to tie someone back to who they are.
I mean, that's why Google got rid of their ad ID. Like there's no other way to fight get through this. And they were just like, okay, we're just gonna drop it. We're not gonna identify the users.
Since you did ads, I assume you probably originally had a little more free reign on what you could store and whatever, and like it was probably easier to build models. Any thoughts in terms of like how marketers are going to have to deal with, having less information essentially on people?
Yeah, now it's I don't know. There definitely everyone has to and are GDPR compliant, and data is definitely treated more carefully inside each company. But there are also so many ways to just find anybody's information, or like, buy leads or whatever, so easily. So it's kind of like you get both sides, like for Yieldmo. So when I was working at that ad network, it was a little bit different because we were just like third party, code snippet that's baked inside, and we would look at like, what device are you using, which IP you're coming from, and like what type of other articles have you seen at this site, whatever. But then like we were also starting to build our own attribution model to build a profile of that user. If we see like either the same behavior or whatever, trying to do that mapping. And how to make this as like for the unique user. So there's a lot of different things that we did. I don't know if I should call it, I don't know if that's like legal or illegal, but we're not attaching it to any personnel, but we're just like creating a profile of that user, right? So it's a little bit different, but for companies like Google, Facebook, these Amazon, like they all have our actual data. They have the names and whatever personal stuff. So it's a different level. You know what I mean?
Names, address. If you're Amazon, you literally know like what pills people are purchasing, like HIPAA borderline. Google can sometimes tell can arguably also tell when you're sick with certain types of things based on your Google searches. So it's
if you use Gmail, Google Photos, or
also that. So yeah, they've got a lot more information than so they got to deal with it. But go ahead.
I mean, coming back to this is like one of the reasons why also we are pretty much focused on metadata at SelectStar. We don't want to get into a position where we have any exposure to the data values by default. Obviously, we are SOC 2 compliant, like we get audited every year. There's like a ton of stuff to like put layers and layers to ensure that our customer data is safe. But by default, like we also wouldn't even access or won't have access to their data values. It's kind of like a double-edged sword. I'm sure we can do a lot more interesting or a more deeper analysis of customers' data at the same time. And right now, I feel like we're still scratching the surface just with the metadata too. So, we'll see how this continues.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of information that can be and insights that can be gathered from just the metadata. I'm sure, and I'm sure it's nice not to be in charge of like actually pulling in real data and just kind of getting like maybe you pull like live a sample data to show people, but other than that, it's like we don't touch it, right? Like you don't want to,
right? Yeah, and we can't run we can't run queries against the data. Like it's like a very kind of like specific design decision we made early on.
Yeah, I think that was a good call overall. I think I've seen a few companies recently kind of get called out for some of that, just because they're like, well, your terms and services seem a little loose. What can you actually do? So, and it's a valid question. As people kind of give more and more to SaaS products, it's like, yeah, they have access to your data, by the way, right? Like they know exactly what if they really want to, they could in theory pull it. And they shouldn't, and they probably don't, but it's a
right. Yeah, and so. It's a little extra work on the integration always, because like you always have to find out like the specific policies that you need our rules to be enabled to only access that metadata and nothing else.
Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah, but I think it's worth it because we don't want to be liable, or we don't want to make it any doubts of our customers team and their customers data team and their legal team either. So we're very strict on that.
Yeah. Do you guys like work with specific solutions? Like obviously, I assume Snowflake, but anything else that you guys really work well with?
Oh, in terms of integration?
Yeah.
Yeah, on the data warehouse side, we work with Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift, Databricks, Postgres, so on and so forth. We also have pretty deep integration with DBT. And obviously, DBT is just more on the model side, so it doesn't have much effect on the sensitive data. For the BI side, we work closely with Looker, Tableau, Power BI, Mode, Sigma Computing, Periscope, Sisense. Like, yeah, I'm sure Metabase. I'm sure I'm forgetting some other companies there. Yeah, but BI is like another part, right? We don't have that. We are not gonna see your dashboard. We won't have access to anything that goes on inside the charts or dashboards, but we'll just see the metadata and access pattern of the dashboards. So
yeah, part of me wants to ask if you have a favorite data warehouse, but I feel like that's never a good question to ask. I have partners with them. I can't tell you.
Well, I'm gonna well, I mean, well, I was thinking I have to then make the question back to you, but because you're interviewing me right now, like you'll probably have to change your answer anyway. So yeah, let's not get into that.
No, it's all good. It's always like, no, I think I have my preferences, and anyone who's worked with me like on a consulting project, I think generally kind of figures it out pretty quickly. But I work on all. It's like at the same time, they're all technically good to some degree. There's ones I dislike more than others, more than anything else. It's like,
yeah, that makes sense, and that's true. Yeah, we've seen like all the major ones I think are pretty good, and we've seen customers like leveraging like different parts of each platform really well, which is not the best for everyone, right? So
yeah. So we got about 12 minutes left here. I don't think anyone's got any specific questions, but I think I've got plenty, so don't worry. I think some of the questions I have, and at least some people that usually ask this question, is like, if you were to restart kind of breaking into the data world today, is there any advice you'd give to yourself?
So breaking into the data world as like getting a job in data as a data professional, or starting a data company. Okay. I think obviously there are a lot of like base level skill sets that you have to be really good at, whether that's Python, SQL, just understanding how different stacks work together and whatnot. I think I think something that is more true for data than other software engineering is just understanding that business context really well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are we really trying to accomplish by building this model or building this report or building this well, I was going to say machine learning, but I already said model. So I think that, and continuously trying to improve the data model underneath is, I think one of the things that I would want to encourage any data professionals to do, because this is like one is mapping the business model. The second part is how to make that model efficient and actually run really well. And then the next part is how to make them maintainable and can also be reusable by others. And that goes into more, deeper you go into, it goes more into more like a software engineering. But I think data overall is like a very, very interesting intersection of business and engineering overall.
Yeah. So some Python, some SQL. Make sure you got your basics. And I think that the big thing is that why. I think most of us, when we first start, it's just not going to be our focus, right? Like it's like when you first start, it's like just focus on being better technically, because you're probably not that great, regardless if you went to school or not. It's just about getting better there. And then eventually you start realizing, okay, I need to not just build things, I need to care about why I'm building things, because otherwise people will just ask me to build things that have no value, and they don't care. They don't think about it, but it's your time is valuable. So
yeah, I think in a way, focusing on the skill to make sure that what you're executing is, like a high quality execution is definitely important for, I think, any entry level people. But in order, after a certain point, it's gonna be a lot more helpful and will make you go faster if you can apply a little bit of a higher level of context in the work you do. So, I think I actually missed your question earlier about like data terms.
Did I not? Did we skip it somehow? I asked you about data terms.
Right. You asked me the question, and then I started talking about, I actually want to say about this too.
Shoot.
And then we just
kept going. So, do you have something?
Remind me the question again.
Yeah. So earlier I asked, like, did you have any data terms that you get rid of, basically, or change?
Yeah, I don't think I can get rid of it because it's just widely used in the industry. But I wish that there is a better term, or we just don't use data ops.
Yeah, I can see that.
Can you define data ops for me?
It would really depend on where I looked for it. I know Nexla. I know Saket from Nexla has probably a good definition of it, but I don't think there's a lot of great definitions around it. It's kind of
initially I felt like this was like, oh, you're applying DevOps to data, so you're applying all these like monitoring and all the things that you're going to measure throughout the whole cycle of data development, which made sense. But then I also hear a lot about like how data ops is also data management, and that comes with like metadata and like other contexts, and that goes into this discovery and catalog. So or governance overall is getting attached to it. So that's when I started getting a little bit confused, because for some of our customers, they actually told us that they don't want to be a ops person of data, because they are the ops person. People are asking them about this question, that question. This is broken. Can you fix it? And I guess in that way, we make that some part of that ops reduced. But then whether we are a data ops platform, do I want to call it that way? Probably not. So that's one term.
Yeah, I think ops in general kind of can be a little bit of a catch-all in some places, where it's just like, it just means operations that have to do with the concept that we referenced before. It doesn't always mean DevOps like operations, right? Like, I think I remember AI ops was going around there for a while, and it's like, oh, is that like ML ops? It's like, no, it's more just operations that have AI on top of it to make your operations easier. And it's like, well, that's very different than DevOps or ML ops. It's like, okay, like how do I coordinate this? What does this actually mean? Ops is an interesting term that way. We do have one question, at least on data discoverability. So basically, just what do you mean by data discoverability?
Yeah, great question. It's making data more discoverable, where we define it as finding and understanding your own data, so you can utilize it better. Yeah. So you have a lot of data, so you should be able to find it, and then finding in a way where you're not just like swimming through hundreds of same looking tables and columns and trying to figure out which one is the right one to use. So that's one part of it. The other part is when you're looking into the table or column or dashboards, for you to have like a full context of data. so that you don't have to ask around other people. You'll be able to gain a full understanding of what the data set is about right away.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, finding and then not just finding, but also understanding, because there's plenty of tools that are like, hey, here's a list of every column that exists, and you're like, great, what do I do with this? Right? It's like, this is not useful to me.
Thousands of results.
Now I'm more confused than I was before. I think did you work at Facebook with iData, or was that prior?
No, that was also after my time.
Yes. That was, I don't know. I loved iData. It made my life easy. Like, it was just like, iData. Then
I heard good things about it.
Yeah. And then you'd find the thing, you'd have data lineage, you'd have who the owner was. The only problem was, like, at Facebook, because of how much people move around and because of how much everyone's trying to get promoted, right? By the time, like, if you find a table that you're like, this could be useful, like, you reach out to the owner, and then it's like, oh, I haven't touched that for 6 months, and I'm on a new team, or I'm no longer, managing it. And you're like, oh, great. So now I have to take this over, and that provides zero value to my promotion cycle, or I just have to ignore this table. But that's a different problem that you can deal with. But just funny Facebook issues. Maybe they don't have that issue anymore. I don't know, but it's always.
Yeah, I've definitely talked with some people that have designed iData in the beginning, as well as users now. I think, definitely a lot of companies here, including like Airbnb, Uber, Facebook, they all ended up building something similar type of tool internally, right? Because of the necessity. And that the core of it is really, it enables everyone to be able to self-service their understanding of data. So, obviously the maintenance and also making sure that things are, being up to date and is continuing to evolve with a great user experience is definitely a separate story. And usually the internal projects, I wouldn't say it's always correlated to the internal promotion either. So that's why we exist.
Yes, exactly.
We'll do that job for you.
No, that's awesome. Great. I mean, we're kind of coming close to time. I don't think there's any more questions. Any final thoughts from you, Shinji, that you want to share with the audience?
No, I mean, this was fun. Went pretty quickly. I know that we've kind of like dabbled around also on distributed computing, streaming, and others, but I think with this new era of cloud data warehouses, lakes, analytics engineering, and having more democratized data access and analytics is a really interesting time to be in. So data discovery and companies like Star is definitely one aspect of it, but I think we will start seeing also like other types of companies popping up. So yeah, I'm very excited about the industry overall and how it's heading.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely very excited to see what kind of happens in the next few years. We'll probably have maybe some cleanup here in terms of like companies. I think you referenced consolidation in multiple ways as like companies start disappearing. Some companies just start buying each other out. Some companies just start merging. And Snowflake and Databricks are merging to have the exact same week of conferences, which is so helpful for all of us that are only one person. So thank you. It'll be fun.
Awesome.
Great. Well, I'm going to hit end the broadcast. Thank you everyone for joined us. Again, thank you so much, Shinji. I really appreciate your time. And then I can kind of say goodbye to everyone. And I don't know if you want to say goodbye, Shinji, but you're welcome to.
Well, thanks so much for joining, and thank you, Ben, for having me here.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to hit end broadcast.